What's up, everybody? Billy here, cutting in a quick intro to this week's podcast. This is the Pert in Your Outdoors podcast. This is episode 118, I believe. Last week's, I posted that up pretty hot right after I came home, was feeling pretty good, posted up the podcast that we did live after the beer event. So I hope you enjoyed that one. There was some good laughs, but was pretty unprofessional. So this week's is kind of back on task, and got together with Troy Kailbourne and talked a little bit about buck fever synthetics, and kind of got into his other business venture, Rock Ridge Outdoors. So we got into that a little bit, but overall, had a really good chat with Troy. It was nice to connect with him again. You'll hear the connection that we have with him, being from the same town that I grew up in, so we have a little bit of history with Troy, and it's really cool to hear the story about how he has gotten to where he has gotten to right now, being the president and CEO of one company and the president of another within just a few years since he got off the ground with both of these, or one of them, and then took on the other. So some really cool stuff happening with Troy, and happy to get him on here to share about his product and what he's up to and all the back end stuff. So I will give a shout out to him. He gave me a sample of some of the buck fever product, the deer. I think it's a package. It's like a sample pack, and it's got 3 different things in it. It's got the overhead. Shit, let me grab one of these things quick. Hold on, pausing. It's the okay, we're back here. Got it. He gave me a little sample pack here. It's 3 different items from him: the pre-post rut and the forehead gland, and the other one that's in there is the vanishing hunter. That's the scent control. But man, he told some stories on here about people that had success with these things, with this product right after they set the camera up, put the stuff on the licking branch, and put it on the ground, make a mock scrape, and then walk away. And I can't believe it. I did this yesterday afternoon. Set up a couple trail cams with my buddy Jeff, and wake up this morning and my camera blew up, and the target buck that I'm after spent a significant amount of time hitting 2 of the different scrapes that we set up yesterday, and I'm pretty fired up. So I'm very excited to be watching along and see how this stuff performs, but very limited experience with it, but just in the last 24 hours, I can't say enough about how well it performs, and it does everything that Troy says it does. So take that for what it's worth, and if you're thinking about doing some stuff with scents, pretty cool. This stuff's 100% made right here in Western New York, and pretty neat product. 100% synthetic, so you're not dealing with any of the deer urine products, which there's some stuff going around with that about CWD. So it's all on the up and up. Cool technology, and we'll talk more about it, I'm sure, in the future as we get more and more experience with it. So that's that. Quick shout out to the Dunnigans. I busted their chops last week on the podcast quite a bit, but just want to give Huntworks a shout out. I know we're going to start talking more and more about them each week. I'm going to do a little infomercial for them, but they've been so supportive of us here at Pert in Your Outdoors, and they came out to the event last weekend at Windy Brew, and many of you that were there purchased product from them, so we appreciate that, and they appreciate that as well, and just good people selling good product, and it seems like stuff is just flying out the door for them. They're having a hard time getting product in fast enough to support the demand. So I guess I would say this, that if you are in the market for tree stands, blinds, anything of that nature, if you think you might want one, I know it's end of August and 90 degrees out today, but I highly advise that you head over to the huntworks.com and check out what they've got in stock and inventory, and give them a holler and pick some stuff up from them. You will not be disappointed. And if you do shop online, use the link that's in our bio in that link tree, and that'll connect your purchase to us, to me, which would help support this podcast. So good stuff with the Dunnigans over at the Huntworks, and give a shout out to Base Map. I just renewed my membership there, doing some scouting, getting ready for the Western trip here in 2 weeks from right now. Hopefully we're sitting around a Well, I don't know if we can have fires out there, but we will be sitting around eating backstrap, hopefully. This will be the end of our opening day hunt on Saturday. 2 weeks from now, we'll be up in the high country. So pretty excited about that, but base map has been a huge tool for us to help us get ready for the high country, as well as doing our whitetail scouting around here and hunting as well. So check out that if you do have interest in purchasing the base map mobile GPS app. Go to the website and to their website, and when you go to checkout, use promo code PERTNEAR20. That'll get you 20% off, and you will have a final bill of $23.99. I know that because I just did it yesterday. So head on over, check those two people out that are helping support us, because we appreciate them supporting us, and we'd appreciate if you support them. It's a big circle, goes round and round, and we have the other companies that we have affiliate codes with on the link tree in our bio. So, all right, that's enough of my sales pitch. I hope you enjoy the chat with Troy, and get out there, get those cameras up, because the bucks they're getting ready to drop that velvet, and they're kind of starting to check out their territory a little bit. So get some of that buck fever and put it up on the licking branch. You're not going to be disappointed, I'm telling you. I'll post up a couple pictures in our with this podcast post. I'll put a couple of the pictures up. You'll shit your pants. All right, keep feeding them, people. Have a good week. Hello. Yeah, that's your name.
Squirrels got me.
Big Jim.
Yeah.
Really, 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 really cold and fun.
Cold and fun.
Cold and fun.
That's good that you think that of it, because that's what deer hunting typically is cold and fun.
Yesterday morning, I'm glassing up on the pass, and I see these deer moving, and I'm like, ooh, there's deer moving. All of a sudden, I just see this person just head down, just hauling ass, wearing shorts and a t-shirt with a pack on. And I'm like, is that Tard? My dad always talks about floating through the woods like the autumn breeze.
So Robert's
when you're
the
275 pounds, I don't know how you do that, but
the Freightliner. It's just like a creeper. You're just kind of up in the corner watching what's going on down there.
yeah,
You know,
he's like,
he's up there slapping it, pissing all over everything.
is it warm yet?
How did you know the name of the actor?
That's right. I know.
Why did you say his name?
Hervé Villechaize.
You know what pert near means.
If you know what pert near means and you live in America, you're a redneck too.
Welcome to the Log Talk Podcast, brought to you by Pert Near Outdoors. So you should be able to hear okay.
Yeah.
Sound all right?
Yeah, sounds great.
Put the microphone likes to be right in front of your mouth. Yeah, that'll bend up. There you go.
Better?
That's perfect. Okay. Yeah, you should be hearing yourself pretty clear. I've got your audio's up pretty good there. So, all right. We're just going to let her rip.
Perfect.
That's how we do. We just hit the record button and let it roll. So,
even better.
Yeah, I a lot of times love to get things set up and put headsets on before any conversations get started, because what we were talking about for the last 20 minutes was like
part of it.
It was good. It was gold, but it was good to some of that stuff off the record, just to hear what's happening with you and what's going on. But it's cool to be here. So I'm at the Rock Ridge Outdoors. Is this your main warehouse or headquarters? What should I call it? HQ?
This is actually a secondary warehouse. Our main warehouse is out of Minden, Louisiana.
Minden, Louisiana. So we are a long ways from Minden, Louisiana.
We are.
So I'm sitting in Victor, New York with Troy Kailbourne. That's how you say it, right? Kailbourne?
Yep, you got it.
Nailed it. I was going to ask you before we hit record, and I just figured I'd throw it out there. It's just what I do. So we have history, unique history, as far as knowing each other from before any of this stuff was going on for either one of us. So I'm here to sit down with you to talk about what you've got going on with Rock Ridge, what's happening with buck fever, and kind of get you a little bit of exposure to our listeners to talk about products that they may have never heard about or might not be aware of are made right here locally. So I guess to kind of get things going, introduce yourself, who you are, and then we'll just kind of let the conversation fly from there.
Yeah, it sounds great. I appreciate it, Billy. The irony of all this, right, is, if you think about so many people that are hunters and the hunting industry as a whole, we're all kids that grow up that love hunting or passionate about it, conservationists, food plots, that whole industry. And I think that's what cracks me up about what you were just saying in the intro here is, we do have history, and that's the hunting industry. It's such a small industry. It's such a small world, and everywhere in every facet that I've been able to grow further and further into it in the last 3 or 4 years of my life, after my previous career, is I find that out. Everybody keeps telling me, like, well, wait a minute, that's so-and-so who knows so-and-so,
right.
And that's what it's really like. So I think that's a fabulous part of that, which I know we can certainly cover in more detail as we go through this today, but appreciate you having us on. I'm Troy Kailbourne. I'm president of Rock Ridge Outdoors. I'm also president and CEO of Buck Fever Synthetics. I, along with a couple other gentlemen, own Buck Fever Synthetics, which we relocated back to Western New York from Michigan a few years ago. I partnered with my partner, Rock Bordelon, who is from Louisiana, thus the primary warehouse and company headquarters for Rock Ridge. Rock Ridge is an umbrella parent company to the former Dead Ringer Hunting, which was locally here in Rochester, New York, which is now the DR Outdoors Group. And then we have the our Cup Waterfowl brand is under Rock Ridge, and then we also have the Grind, which is our turkey division, which is headed up by Mr. Terry Rahm himself, 2-time Grand National Champion caller and first gentleman ever inducted into NWTF's Hall of Fame.
That's pretty cool.
Years ago. Yeah, it's awesome. As a kid, growing up with Dick Kirby and Quaker Boy down the road and all these other people, and you just look at it, and the fact that I get to share time, in a turkey blind with Terry Rahm it's a kid's dream that's come true. In my position where I'm currently sitting.
Yeah. So it's like how the hell did we get here?
Yeah.
So I think so I talk about we have history. So going way back, I grew up in Hunt Falls. I don't know how long you lived where you live in Hunt Falls, but just so happened to be that you were neighbors to my best friend.
Yep.
And we were young kids running around, terrorizing the woods, probably driving Troy nuts as he was trying to manage his property, and we're over there running around with slug guns, shooting everything that moves. But pretty funny, the fact that I run into you a few years later. I think it was maybe a year and a half ago, I ran into you at the Chevy dealer in town.
Yeah. Yep.
And you were kind of getting done with your service as I was coming in to get mine done, and we started shooting the breeze. And you were telling me that you had just gotten into, I think I had asked you if you were teaching, or I had seen that you were doing something with the synthetics. I don't remember exactly how the conversation went, but you just gave me like a real quick rundown of like all the stuff you had going on. You were heading out of town. I think you were heading to PA or something to go to a hunting camp with somebody. And I was like, you left. I'm like, holy shit. I'm like, Troy's doing it. Like, you're getting into a whole new realm. Yeah. And I don't know if you must have just recently left your previous career to jump into doing this full time. So like, how did that all transpire? Like, how did you find yourself to get into the position you're into today to be the president and CEO of one company and the president of another?
And it's funny. It's everybody's lives, have different turns at different stages between, growing up and then college and, being a bachelor and partying and running around the country and doing, what I had the chance to do. And then obviously falling in love and marrying a wonderful woman who is now a hunter, an accomplished hunter. She's done a fabulous job. And it was, for all the women out there that might listen to the podcast that have husbands that are hunters that are interested, jump in, get into it, because it's awesome. And my wife, it was literally like, hey, we got to do something here because I love your passion for hunting, but, I have 3 children, and she's like, we're married and we got to do this. So I'm either going to join you or something's going to change.
At what point did she jump into it?
About 6 years after we were married. So she's been in it,
And you had kids at that point?
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. So, and all 3 of our kids are hunters. I have a daughter and 2 sons. And they've been raised in the culture and the lifestyle of your question of how did we get here? And that's really, it's a crazy turn of events in life of what you want and what you're passionate about. And I think every hunter I've ever met, any hunter I've ever talked to it's just our core center belief of who we are, how we live our lives. Foremost conservationists and caring for wildlife. And I've had so many conversations with people of like, how can you shoot Bambi and, shoot the turkeys? They're so beautiful. Yeah, they absolutely are. And we provide for them in every way, shape, and form. And, hunting on that land that I now call my home farm that I've worked on for so long, and the area where you grew up, running around and hunting, it has been sort of a real passion to be able to develop the land and have the conservation movement to really provide for the animals, the food plots, and feed them and nourish them during the stressful periods of the year, and selectively harvest a few of them each year, for the good of the herd, and obviously to fill our freezers. People always ask me the question, do you consume what you shoot? And absolutely. If we shoot it, we eat it, and we donate it to the homeless and the veteran shelters, the food banks, we give back each and every year, which I know almost every hunter does. So that's a huge part of this, that I think there's a lot of people out there that maybe don't hunt or are against hunting that, when they're educated about it, begin to go, okay, wow, it's not exactly what I thought it was. Coming from a small town in the southern tier of New York before I moved up to the south of Rochester, current location where we live out in Honey Lake Falls, I was raised on sort of the old Pennsylvania method of hunting, of shotguns, and it's brown, it's down, and deer drives and bang away. At a young age, I don't remember exactly how, but I was always fascinated. And I didn't come from a hunting family, which is, I think people are like,
oh, really?
Are you kidding me? Like, how are you sitting here today in the position you sit in
kind
the
of
companies you own,
yeah.
With it. And, my dad was not a hunter. He was a guy that worked extremely hard. And I have a brother and sister, came from a family. My mom didn't work. My dad provided for us, but he was gone all the time. And it was like, he just didn't have time actually to enjoy the wilderness. He liked shooting. We had guns when we were kids. We were raised, I believe correctly, to respect all of wildlife and respect the guns and the lifestyle. And so I had two neighbors that in the small town of Wellsville, New York, where I grew up.
Oh, okay, from Wellsville.
In the region, yeah, which was fabulous. My grandfather just passed away recently from down there. He's 101 years old, and
wow.
We have deep roots. My uncle was a state trooper down there, so he's been a roadie, and on we back the blue. We're very supportive of obviously the culture and the lifestyle, and our law enforcement, first responders, and our military people. And that's, a lot of them are obviously hunters. And we look at this and being raised down there, I had two neighbors, and they were both diehard hunters. One was a doctor, one was a blue-collar, working guy, and I was just obsessed with it. And it was, in my genetics, in my blood, and they took me all the time, and I started doing that, and then I went off to college in northern New York, Potsdam, New York, and I met a college, fraternity brother of mine the first semester, and he got me into bow hunting, literally the first week of my freshman year of college. I skipped a day of classes, grabbed $500 out of my checking account, went down to the local archery shop, got hooked up with a bow and arrow, and started shooting.
Nice.
and killed my first whitetail with a bow, actually right along the St. Lawrence River Valley, in my college fraternity brother's backyard, and been obsessed and hooked ever since. So, when, I spent 20 years, I graduated college and actually was a teacher, as you know. I spent 20 years teaching here locally, in the, district, and I loved it, but I always had the passion for the food plot stuff. I had a small piece of ground in the southern tier, outside of Wellsville, that we had bought as a hunting camp, and there was no food on it for whitetails whatsoever. And I was fortunate enough, I actually met Ray Scott at a Bassmasters tournament years ago, when we were on vacation in the South, and I got a chance briefly to talk to him, and he was, this is late 80s, early 90s, and I said something about, you must love that you're living out your dream of Bassmaster, and he said, oh no, he said, this is a job. It's my dream and my passion is whitetails.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and he said, in fact, I'm coming out with a new clover blend, and boom, Imperial Whitetail, and he said,
Oh, that's Ray Scott?
That was Ray Scott and the Scott family, yep. So, and Ray was such a pioneer in that, in Imperial, and he gave me a little test plot of seed, like quarter acre, and he said, kid, plant this, and he said, they will come. And literally I came home and I took a backpack sprayer and, sprayed off a little bit in front of a tree stand and killed it and raked it and put it down and watered it, and boom, you had a nice plot of clover that came up, and I killed a hell of a nice buck that first year with it, 20 yards,
Yeah.
And I'm like, hey, the guy's not lying. He knows what he's doing. And I was obsessed with food plots ever since then. And I used to run the 390 corridor, from Rochester down to the southern tier. And Friday nights, I had a black Chevy pickup and a black lab in the front seat, and I, somewhere around Geneseo, pass a green Chevy pickup with a yellow lab in the front seat. Sunday nights coming back, I'd pick them up around Bath, New York, and we'd ride together, and he'd get off just above Geneseo, and I'd keep coming. And eventually,
So you're on the same schedule.
Same schedule, and we were cracking up because, we'd always wave. He had the dog, I had the dog,
That's
it's a
hilarious.
lab thing and a Chevy thing. And we were going, finally the one night I went down, it was cell phones were just coming into fruition, which I know a lot of people, hard to believe, but they haven't been around that long. So it's like all of a sudden there was the cell phone number on the truck. So I called it.
He wrote the number on his truck?
Yeah, he had the decal, and the stuff on there, and it said North Country Whitetails.
Oh, okay.
And so I was like, I called it, and he's like, hey, Neil Doherty, North Country Whitetails.
Oh, okay.
And I'm like, hey, how you doing? I'm like, I'm the guy in the black truck with the black dog. He's like, you got to be a deer hunter. He's like, we're just keeping the same schedule, blah, blah, blah. We start talking. So we talked a little bit, and he said, hey, I have a proving ground testing facility outside of Castillo, New York. And I said, oh, I'm just over the hill from you. So why don't you come over Sunday, and, we'll shoot the breeze and hang out. And Neil and I have been friends ever, and it's been 20 years.
No shit.
And his father, Craig, that we recently just lost, obviously a pioneer with QDMA and the background and everything in the hunting and Golden Eagle archery here in Rochester, New York. So deep heritage, and it was just right. You laugh about how we sitting here today and the connections you have with people. But I met Neil that day, and we discussed food plots, all afternoon, and have stayed in touch and still talk, pretty much at least once a month now, and bounce ideas off of each other and still share deer hunting stories and enjoy it. So, and Craig was certainly a fabulous and wonderful guy. He was a great mentor to me. He gave me tons of advice about this industry early on, and I always appreciated that very much. They were great people. And that was it. I mean, the food plots is how I got into it. So I spent, 20 years as an educator. I taught, and I loved teaching, but every waking moment that I wasn't teaching, I was, doing timber stand improvements, food plots, hanging tree stands, building funnels, trying to do anything to better the deer population and my chances and opportunities, while also, maintaining a wife and kids and marriage and trying to raise them and sports and athletics and everything that goes with it. And then that's just kind of what led me into, the outdoors is such a small industry. You meet people and opportunities open up. And I always knew, after probably 16, 17 years in teaching, I was like, I if I can do this, I want to jump full speed into it. And I got my 20 years in here in New York State, and then I had some other things happen in my life that, allowed me a little opportunity to raise some money and have some money in the bank to be able to, venture out on my own. And boom, we jumped into buck fever synthetics.
Yeah. Now, what would you... I'm curious the age you were roughly when you got into when you bought the property there in Honey Falls and you started, falling in love with the process of managing the land, and, whether it's a 1,000-acre piece of property in the southern tier or it's, 30 acres in Monroe County, what was it for you that really got you going? Because I can speak from I'm 33 years old, and finally, I grew up with family property, but it's never been mine to do what I want to do with. And not that I physically own property now, but my in-laws' property, they're kind of passing it down. The generations are passing it down to myself and Brian and Dallas to really start doing what we want to do with the property to develop it. And I've got a totally different outlook on things now because I can go out with a chainsaw and we can scheme and come up with our own ideas about what we want to do. Whereas before it was just I got to call and ask Dad what him and Uncle Mike want to do, or we got to go and ask Bob if we can go do this weekend. Where now it's guys, here's our plan. Get that saw and let's get out there and start working for hours on end. And that changed something to me. Did you kind of experience the same sort of thing, or?
Yeah, because when we moved from Wellsville, we actually moved up into Pittsford, just north of Honey Falls, and what was back in the day southern Pittsford. So we were right on the edge of the farm communities.
Yeah.
And when I graduated college, I went off, I got my master's and traveled a bunch. And then eventually around 96, 97, I relocated back to Rochester with the education and teaching job. My dad was just on the verge of retiring from his career. My grandfather was still in Wellsville. I had an uncle, family, cousins down there. So my dad, we looked for a place, and there was a small farm actually shooting. It was a pheasant hunting club. In Andover, New York, and it came up for sale. And my dad said, what do you think? He's like, I kind of need a retirement project when I retire, and he's like, I know you want a deer hunting camp, and we can kind of do the same things together and enjoy some time together. So I said, okay, sure. So I think it was roughly around 97, 98, we bought the small farm in Andover, and I went immediately to working on the food plots and trying to rehabilitate the property back into a mainstay deer hunting camp. And Neil Doherty and that connection helped me tremendously. Neil consulted on the property, and we did pine plantings and started to break it up into quadrants and zones and the thermals and everything that goes into the hunting aspect of it. And that was really my first piece of property that was mine, even though it's a family-based property with my dad, and we share it with my brother and sister and their families now. And then I'd commute back and forth from Rochester, and I was living in the village of Pittsford, and I obviously always drove through Honey Falls and Mendon. I had a lot of good friends that grew up in the area, and my college fraternity brother that I'd always stayed so close to lived on his own piece of ground in the North Country in the St. Lawrence River Valley, up by Ogdensburg, and he just, it was just beautiful. It was always gorgeous, and I was like, and he always said to me, I was always envious because, as most hunters do, right? We live in our homes, we live our lives, but when it's time to go hunting, it's a 3 o'clock in the morning wake up call. You got to have your truck packed, all the equipment in. You got to travel to your hunting spots. I mean, most people aren't fortunate enough to build a hunt on their home ground. And you're extremely fortunate if you have a camp and you get to go to it and share the camp time. So I was extremely fortunate to have the camp and share the camp time with the guys. But I kind of knew I was still single, and I knew at the time, I'm like, when I do most likely get married and have a family and take that next step, I had heard all the older guys say, hey, listen, like the closer to home you can be, the better it's going to be if you actually think you're still going to get a chance to hunt. And I think anybody, that's married with young kids listening to this certainly understands
the closer to home, the better.
Yeah. And I used to drive, obviously what I used to call Little Iowa, which was the Mendon, Hunter Falls Mecca around Mendon Ponds Park because of the genetics and the deer herd and the farms that were there. And I'm like, the size of the bucks that are there. I mean, it's just, you drive anywhere around Mendon Ponds Park, you're like, holy cow, this is unbelievable. It is. And extremely fortunate. And I think a lot of people, I know a lot of listeners are regional, listeners, but anybody outside of that region is, New York State's quite capable of producing trophy bucks, and I think we've seen that in the last few years. The genetics are here, managing the herds and growing and the supplements and supporting it and really getting on board with how the management of other states do it. We have the capabilities to do that, and it's been a long process, but we're getting there as a state as a whole. So I was driving back from my camp one night, and I was just detouring around, looking at properties, and I came across a piece of property in Hunter Falls that was literally – I drove down one road to look at a different piece that I knew was for sale, and I came back, and all of a sudden I said, wait, that for sale sign wasn't there 5 minutes ago when I drove by. So I swung a rack around, and I jumped on the cell phone. I called it, and there was a farmer that was haying the field. And I called the number, and a nice lady answered the phone, and I said, hey, I'm just calling about the for sale sign. She says, well, my God, my husband just left with the tractor, and he's cutting hay. She's like, he must have just put it in. And I said, oh, yeah. I said, well, yeah, he's coming around the field now. And she said, oh, yeah, just talk to him. He'll give you all the details, blah, blah, blah. And he pulls up, shuts the tractor off, and I rolled down the window. I said, hi, sir. How you doing? I said, I'm talking to your wife. He says, well, I hope you're not talking dirty to her. He says, because you're much younger and better looking. I was like, are you kidding me? Yeah. So I hung up with her and got on with him, talked to him. He's like, yeah, come back here. He's like, property goes in the woods. It's got a creek on it. And he drove me out in the back of the tractor. And literally, this was August, late August, almost this time of year. I walked into the woods and I stepped over the bank, and a nice buck jumped up in velvet, ran down the hill, and a flock of turkeys flushed. And I was like, sold. I'm like, we not sure how I'm going to afford this. Like I think every land purchaser does. Like, I want this, but I got to be able to afford it. And so I was fortunate. They actually had me over a couple nights to dinner, and I reminded the farmer.
So this was like a private sale. It was
completely private, no realtor or anything. I just happened to catch, a hay lot for sale by landowner. Him and his wife had me over to their house in Hunter Falls for dinner. Mm-hmm. We shared a dinner, and he was a German short-haired pointer guy. I was a lab guy, hunted upland, pheasants and that stuff. So we had a lot in common there. We talked, and he's like, you're me 30 years ago with a dream. He's like, I want this dream to happen for you. He's like, so Jesus. He's like, I'll hold paper for you. You can make payments. He gave me a really low interest rate. I mean, God puts people in the right place at the right time.
Weird, right?
And I've been blessed, certainly. The good Lord has looked out for me and said, hey, this is it. And I spent 3 years paying off the property, and then had obviously the dream of building my home on that and living where I live. And over the last 21 years.
So what year? Because I'm just trying to put the timeline together. Was that, did you buy that around 2000?
Just 2000, 99 to 2000. Okay. I actually bought it. I think I bought it in 98, started the purchase in 98, 99, paid it off by 2001, and then right after September 11th, the events and everything, obviously, so hard to believe 20 years ago, it was when my house was just under construction. But I've lived there just since 2001, 2002.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because that timeline's right, because I don't know if you remember or not, but I did the concrete with Dan Thayer around your house.
Yep, absolutely.
So, and I was trying to remember if that was an addition or not, but you had a brand new build. So you were, that was probably 06-ish, 07 maybe, somewhere in that range. But so, okay, because I don't know. I guess I didn't think about it. Then I was young and not paying that close of attention to homes and properties and things like that. But so you built that house there. Yeah. Yeah. And that's, you've got a freaking badass little spot there.
So thank you. And it's, everyone that looks at it now is like, oh my God, it's so different than what it was and what it's become. But it's just a true testament to anybody who has the drive and the passion. I mean, it's late hours. I'm fortunate now I have a cab tractor, as a small compact that, with, the air conditioning, the heat and the music in it, which I love because I had an open station for the first 10 years and would eat bugs and dirt.
Oh,
and when your kids are little, I mean, I used to go out at 10 o'clock at night and tell my wife, I'm like, listen, I'll be back in about 1 or 2. And she's like, well, you got to get up at 5 to go to work. I'm like, yeah, but we got to get the food plots.
Right. Food plots got to get done, and you don't want me doing it when the kids are awake.
Correct.
Yeah, it's cool to talk to somebody like yourself whose kids are, I think you just took one of your kids off to college.
Yep.
And you got a couple other ones that are at home, but they're close to graduating, right?
Yeah. My boy just graduated. My middle son just graduated. And luckily, he's going to stay locally and go to school and live at home.
Nice.
And my youngest is actually a freshman at HFL.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, you're later on. And that's the stuff. Like, I got a buddy that I talked to about this stuff and the challenges of being a parent of 2 little ones and all the stuff you want to do. And it's like you're getting up at 4 a.m, or you're going to bed at 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, or doing both, so that you can find time to grind and do the stuff that you want to do. But I think that's a type of person, and you're going to get opportunities. You're going to have things that present themselves to you if you're willing to put that extra time in and work hard for it.
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't be sitting where you are today if you didn't make certain decisions at certain times or decide to push hard here or there. I think there's a lot to be taken from that.
And that's the lifestyle, I think, of people that are hunters. I mean, they're workers. I mean, they're not afraid of hard work. They're not afraid of 20-hour days or getting 4 hours sleep and getting up and going to the day job and doing this, around the clock and weekends and the amount of time. And I can remember always thinking, everyone's like, oh, deer season, in New York is just November, just during the gun season. I'm like, no, there's, entire bow season, which is phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I used to, the older guys that I hunted, that I grew up hunting with in Wellsville, when I first started bow hunting, they're like, oh, no, kid, you're not using that stick and sliver over here, and shooting those little friggin' arrows at these deer. Like, they're made to be shot with shotguns. And I can remember, so when we ended up getting our farm, I mean, and I started killing a couple nice bucks, and the older guys started coming around and go, hey, what are you doing? I'm like, well, I'm hunting in October, and I'm hunting a food plot, and that was all foreign to those guys. They're like, well, isn't a food plot an agricultural field? I'm like, yeah, essentially, but there's some things you can do to manicure it and make it a little different. And there's a ton of trial and error. I've made so many mistakes, as we all do. If I could have the 20 years back and know, if you could learn, if you could give yourself that 20-year notice of like, hey, don't do this. But that makes you who you are, and
right.
The hard work side of it, and just hunters as a whole group of people. The core values are just there. I mean, they're just true-blooded, hardworking Americans. I mean, let's be realistic.
It's very true. Yeah,
it's our heritage.
It is.
Yeah, and then people. There's obviously everything in our political climate in the world we live in today, but. We wouldn't be here if hunters didn't land on this continent, and Native Americans were hunters, and that's their sustenance, and that's where it comes from. And that's the history side of me, loves that, part of it of, connected with nature. And my wife dies. I love watching corn grow. I love it. I love watching putting corn in the ground. I watch every stage of it, and she's like, what's wrong with you? She's like, I'm like, it's just fascinating to me. And now having the availability of the local people, I really can't say enough about my local friends. And I know, obviously, you're friends with a bunch of them. A bunch of them. We have this similar background. There's just so many great people in our community.
And you need help. Hey, my tractor broke down. I need this, or I'm out of seed of this thing. You got it and kick around. It's like, oh yeah, I got a bag right here. What do you need for it? Nothing. Just take care of it. It's like, and it's all it is. It's the type of people, and I think it goes back to so many. If you're a hunter. Almost every hunter that I know is a very giving, caring person, supportive, willing to work as hard as possible, and wants to provide. And that's something, I think it gets like over dramatized, but there is something that is incredibly valuable to that, is that there's, at the end of the day, like all the work you put in on your property, and then when you have that opportunity to kill that animal and take it home, provide for your family or provide for someone who's in need, like there's value there, but you're providing for that deer. You're giving them habitat that's healthy to live in, that their nutrition is there. And you're not just helping them, you're helping the whole ecosystem, all the animals, the rabbits, the pheasants, the grouse, like everything you're doing, it's like you're just trying to pour back into it. And I think a lot of people just don't understand. They don't understand. They look at it and say like, oh, you just killed Bambi. It's like, whoa, there's so much more to it. We're out there. I came up with this term because it seems like in the off season when it's like the winter time, I get all riled up about stuff, and then you get busy and you don't have any time to get too riled up about it. But like this whole off season, throughout the winter, I was kind of like real riled up about timber management and, leave it forever wild or manage the timber, like that discussion back and forth. And I'm like, I really believe it's like you're like either active conservation or passive conservation. And I feel like hunters are, for the most part, are very active into conservation. Like we're out there not just saying keep it this way, we have to protect it, so keep it and leave it, let it be wild, but we want to be part of that process. And that's a long standing. You just talked about Native Americans and Vikings, and you go back to the Romans. It's like we were involved in the environment. We were out there planting things, killing things to provide for our families, and to ultimately, I mean, there's been a lot of bad stuff that's happened, whether it's basically hunting buffalo extinct or turkeys or deer, there's bad times,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
But what the modern day conservationist does to try to help the betterment of the environment, I don't think it can go, you can't overstate it, how much people want to make things better. And it's, unfortunately, I think most people like you and I are so busy that we don't have time to go out and talk about what it is that we're doing. We're just out there doing it.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense. There's just a lot of words that just came out of my mouth, but
it's a ton.
I don't have time to go and stand in front of people and tell them about what I'm doing because I'm too busy trying to do it.
Yeah. And I think, the educational side of who the modern day hunters are, and it's certainly part of, podcasts like this and reaching out to the younger hunters. I mean, I forget, I'm not sure my numbers are 100% accurate, but I know last year in COVID, right, there's like 55,000 new hunting licenses sold in the state of New York. And a lot of those were, 23 to like 14 years old. And I'm glad that New York State has jumped more on board with other states that, they're allowing younger kids to hunt. Having kids, my two oldest kids, were just at the age where I couldn't legally let them hunt in New York, so I had to take them to Pennsylvania or Missouri, which drove a passion and obviously, led me to meet other people. And I have, other people in my life, that have opened up other doors and opportunities for us, and we've shared experiences with our kids hunting out of state. And now it's been great. New York State has rolled back those rules and regulations, and I've told the DEC and anyone that will listen, hey, if you're waiting until 16 years old to get a kid in the woods, you've lost them. Mm-hmm. Video games and generation and phones and TikTok and all this other stuff that's on these phones now. I said, you got to get kids at an early age, and you got to bring them out there. The introduction of obviously blinds like the redneck blinds that are out there have made it so much more enjoyable and easier. And, some guys I say all the time, you're hunting a blind, you're not really hunting. I'm like, no, but I spent 25 plus years freezing everything off in the tree stand, right, and missed the buck at the end of the day because I was so cold I could barely, lift my arms up to freaking draw the bow back. And just getting kids in general and getting my wife in and the conservation side of it, explaining to people when my wife, when my in-laws first came over to the house and, I was doing all the work and, I'd come in and dirty and chainsaw oil and gas. And then my mother-in-law was like, so wait a minute, you're like, can't you just shoot a deer like the old days, just drag it in the house and be done with it? She's like, what are you doing all this work for? And I'm like, it's the conservation side of it. And my wife didn't even fully understand it, and she's grown to understand it. And now, she's a diehard, and it's awesome because female, women in the outdoors and the industry as a whole and growing our industry and couples sharing time. I mean, I've had, obviously the pleasure of meeting a lot of the celebrities in the hunting industry over the last few years and sharing time with them. And Lee and Tiffany Lakoski, right? I mean, a perfect example of their story of what it was. Yeah. And we met them years and years ago before they had kids. And we had a great time, a great conversation, and it's so great to see them now, having children and raising them, and Pat and Nicole and all the events of, other people in the industry. And, my wife, when she first got into this, she doesn't like guns, so she's primarily just a bow hunter. We finally got her upgraded to a gun for turkey season because we spent a few years trying to shoot a turkey with an arrow, and that's a struggle.
It's a struggle.
They are meant to be shot in the face for a reason.
Right.
So, but it's, that side of my wife, like learning all about it, and now the conservation side, like she gets it. I don't even run our game cameras. I mean, she handles all that? She handles all our game cameras, and again, obviously, even with the new game cameras and the cell cams and all the stuff, it's a little easier, but she manages all the SD cards, the batteries, she checks them, she takes the labs for a walk, she's the placement of them. I mean, if they're down, she's like, okay, we got to go change this out. And it's, it's funny because the last couple of years around the house, she's killed a nice buck. And, people say this all the time, like, I haven't killed a deer at home in 5 years.
Really?
A buck.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've killed does, and we do the doe management side of things, but it's like my wife, and again, there's nice ones there, but I want to let them grow. I want to see what they'll become. You deal with the neighbors and the pressure that of harvesting stuff. And
Listen, I'm not over there
I
anymore.
know you're
all
not
right?
one of them
You can't,
anymore.
Don't
so
look at me like that.
It's not you.
Yeah, the gene pool has been cleansed since we were there.
And it's happening. I mean, it's great, and I have great neighbors, and there's every farmer locally around me. I've asked every farmer from Meisensalz to Hastings to Mr. Deroux. They've always responded. They've always given me a hand. They've always pulled me out. They've always lent. They've always borrowed something. And that's the thing. The farmers in this world, we've really got to continue to support these guys.
Hell yeah.
Falling on tough times. But there's not a local farmer that hasn't been so kind and generous to me to help me in any way, shape, or form. And I mean, they used to mock me and laugh at me like, this kid's whacked. Like he's trying to do this stuff for deer and turkeys. Like, but many of them now get it and they're like, hey, this is awesome. But I think, my wife hunting and her getting into this and people are like, you do all this work and you haven't even killed a buck in 5 years. I'm like, no, I'm like, it's a family-based environment now. And it's definitely brought our family closer. I mean, the culture, the lifestyle and getting younger kids into it and watching my kids' friends now come over and we've gotten them into it. And that's the future of the sport, and the heritage of who we are and promoting the health and wellness of the animals throughout, the next generation. So.
Do you think the stuff like with the trail cams and that, do you think that's helped kind of create something that's a year-round interaction for especially your kids? Did they find great interest in that,
the
cameras?
Yeah. Shed hunting is almost as big as archery hunting for us in the household. I mean, there's contests. We're constantly, it's competitive in our household.
That's cool.
And it's fun. My boys are also big fishermen. We got a couple ponds on the property that I've built and put in over the years and stocked, and it's great. Like I woke up the other day and both my kids, got up before I did, and they're out back fishing in the pond, and the sun's coming up, and I'm like, how awesome! So they're not on a phone.
Yeah.
They're not doing this, all the other stuff. They're very athletic. They're all lacrosse players locally, and fortunately, we've been very lucky to have kids that are very active. But the role model that I think my wife is. She's a mother of three, and I think it's important because I think the hunting community also looks at women in the outdoors, and a lot of the younger girls, I guess, in the outdoors, and my wife probably killed me for saying this, but not, she's certainly young. She's very young at heart, but we're at that age. We're in our late 40s, and we look at this point of time where she picked us up around probably 37, 38 years old, I think, and she dove in. You don't have to be a 16 or 18 or 22-year-old. It's great if you are, but, women that raise their kids and then your kids get old enough, you get a little free time, and you want to start doing it, jump in. It's, just target shooting. We all shoot together off the deck at home at night. That's usually after dinner, we grab our bows and we sit there and we shoot some of the 3D targets in the backyard. And it's some of the best nights we have is literally, late summer nights in August doing that.
For sure. Yeah, it is. I don't know if I'll ever be able to wrangle my wife into it or not, but I know it's something that, I hope, I've got a son and a daughter, and I hope that they're both interested in it. They're certainly going to have the opportunity to be. We're out doing it. They're checking since they've been 2 weeks old. They've been in the chest carrier, carrying them around, checking cameras and walking through the woods looking for sheds, And I hope that my kids have that interest because I do see that. Like I know that's what my brother and I grew up with our father and our uncles and grandfather. That was it, it was rooted there. So, where it goes from there is up to what the kids want it to be, just like it was with Jimmy and I. And ironically, I went my own path and I came right back to it once those things were done. You move on through those stages of your life with sports and college and that, and hey, it's here for you. And it's a lifelong, and it's a lifestyle is really what it comes down to be,
Absolutely. And that's, we're blessed. My daughter plays for the University of Pittsburgh women's lacrosse team.
Oh, she does?
Yeah.
Wow.
And they've started that
what year is she?
Program. She's going into her senior year.
Wow.
And they want her freshman year when she graduated HFL, and she had, HFL girls lacrosse is phenomenal.
Really good,
They've had a solid run forever. Unfortunately, we fall a little short at the end of the championships to the Long Island teams, but the competition's always been great. So she went as a freshman. They won. Pitt's team was a D1 club lacrosse program, and actually a couple other local girls, from HFL and a girl from Brighton that played on our travel team all went to Pitt. And as freshmen, they all played, and they actually won the D1 club championship, program. So
Yeah.
they were the champions, and it was it was a great year for her. And right after they won the club championship, they announced that they were going to have a full NCAA D1 program. And both her and Peyton and Caroline all got asked to play on it. And so, unfortunately, COVID messed a lot of that up last year where it was really supposed to kick off. So they're certainly looking for a fabulous year. And, my sons both lacrosse players, play locally, and my middle boy is going to play both soccer and lacrosse at school here locally.
Nice.
So they love that, but they also know the fishing and the hunting is there for them. You're only going to play lacrosse for those years, or baseball, football, hockey, soccer, whatever you do. And this is always there. Golf's a lifelong sport too, and some of the other ones, but it's like this is the ones that it's there, and if they want to do it, they can do it. And if they choose not to do it, that's their choice. I've introduced them to it, and they've all seemed to be hooked. And are very interested, but I hope they carry it on. But if they choose not to, they choose not to. That's the thing about it. It's free country. It's free choices.
Country. It's free choice. Yeah, your life, your choice, right?
Yep,
yeah,
exactly.
I hope that stays around for a while.
Yeah.
So I would say that's kind of how we got here.
Yeah.
So then let's get into buck fever. So that's where your journey into the business side of the outdoors started. So how did buck fever come along to you that you got involved with that?
Yeah, great question. So Neil and Craig with the food plot, I was doing a bunch of food plot work. I bought a no-till drill. I started, keeping up on all of the progressive side of, the fastest, most economic, in and out that we could plant these plots. Because, having the kids, I did all that. I had the baby backpack on and hand seed and stuff, late at night walking around with the kids. I had one kid in a stroller and the other kid on my back, and my wife, wherever she was, with my daughter probably for lacrosse. I was like the boys and, sleeping in the tractor over my shoulder trying to steer and, bush hog and stuff. And now, my 14 was bush hog in the field the other day, and I'm like, oh, it's so great to sit here and drink a beer and watch him bush hog in the field, and my 18-year-old's moving tree stands around. So, I ended up, the food plot was really where I got introduced in the industry. And I just started to make some connections. I had created, one food plot company, and then eventually just kind of sold it and moved on to something else and started dealing with other stuff. And I started making connections in the industry. And then I created Non-Typical Life Outdoors, which is, a small, we deal redneck blinds and some seed companies and seed distribution for food plot. I still have that, part of it. And my 18-year-old pretty much kind of runs that stuff for us
really?
now, and is pretty heavily involved. I've kind of turned it over to him because obviously not enough time in the day.
That's pretty cool.
And we looked at, with this, I had a friend come to me in the industry that I had met, and it's certainly, locally the Dead Ringer guys, Christian Meyer, who's also part of Rock Ridge Outdoors. We were at ATA, and I had talked to a couple people, and then I met a guy, and he called me and he said, hey, he's like, you ever heard of Hog Synthetics? And I said, not only have I heard of it, I said I used it back in the 90s. I said I bought it at Walmart, and I said it was a white bottle with an orange and black label. And I said I think the primary product was called Deer Stop. And I said it was phenomenal. And now this is pre-web, pre-internet, pre-cell phones, pre-anything. I used it for a couple of years, and it up and disappeared. It just wasn't in Walmart, wasn't anywhere. So I'd forgot all about it, And so this guy said, the original Hog Synthetics is now a company called Synthetic Sense, and they still have it's Buck Fever by Hogs was the name on it, and it was manufactured by Synthetic Sense out of Fenton, Michigan. And I said, okay, no, but I said, I if it's the same formula, I know it works. And he said, the guy's actually looking to sell it. And I said, okay. I'm like, I'm interested. And it was perfect timing for me because I was just, approaching 20 years in teaching and really had my mindset that, I wanted to leave. A shout out to my brother who's locally here too, who runs a liquid natural gas company, and we worked together to get that off the ground, and he's done a phenomenal job with that. He's worked his tail off, and so some things happened there, and he said, hey, we're in a place, if there's a little bit of money you need for investment. My father said, if you need some investment money, we're willing to back in, do this. So I said, yeah, thank you very much, So we put it together, and there's a couple other local guys that said, hey, I'd be interested. We all were at the right place at the right time. So we went out to Fenton, Michigan, and met Jim Lombardi, who's the former owner of Synthetic Sense. And he had both Buck Fever and Vanishing Hunter, which is an odor killer. We had a great meeting. It was, wonderful. And Jim he was a gym engineer, and he had some, other opportunities business-wise. And he said, I still want to be part of this, but he said, I'm willing to sell the core formulas and let you guys run with it if that's what you want. So we worked out a deal over 6 months, and this is back in 18. And we ended up acquiring it. And then it was like, oh my God, how do you, how do we do this in Michigan? And what I came to find out is everyone knows about Michigan. It's a great state for hunting and diehard hunters. And it, buck fever is a cult in Michigan.
Is it?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, it's amazing how many people are like, no, don't take buck fever away from the state, and don't let it get out there, because I'm drawing bucks off my neighbor's property. I don't really want the guy next door to know about the product,
Right.
So we ended up from 18 to 19 into 20 actually relocating all the manufacturing, and we talked this just a little bit before you came in here. I found a gem of a nice little chemical manufacturing facility right down the road.
Yeah.
Who happens to be owned by a high school buddy of mine that I grew up playing baseball and football with. And I couldn't believe it when I met him. I was like, you got to be kidding me. I mean, again, good Lord looking out for people and taking care of people. So we moved the manufacturing completely back to Western New York. Everything is manufactured in the United States of America. And so ultimately for us, that was a big part of this. We want made in the USA on our labels. He sources, and we have, the blow molders, the labels, the seals, the sprayers, everything. We had a problem when we bought the company. Jim unfortunately was using Chinese sprayers. And it was,
and that being the spray tops
for the forehead gland.
Yeah.
And they just were a thin, tube. And we went to an American-made sprayer, made also in New York State. And so it was a wider tube sprayer. And that seems to be much better. And it's a cool part of buck fever, especially in our forehead gland, is it does crystallize, which is a positive effect of it. When you spray it or you dump it on the ground, most all of our products, there's a crystallization to it, which means, it lasts a lot longer. It doesn't filter down through the soil. It actually adheres to the soil, and moisture reactivates it. But one of our biggest headaches when we first bought the company was the sprayers, because, malfunctioning and clogging and whatnot. And
because
so,
you get that crystallization and it plugs it up a little bit.
It's a huge positive of the product, but it's also frustrating to the user. Like, hey, it's a brand new bottle and the sprayer's not working, or clogging up on us. So
right.
Usually hot water running through the spray top will clean it out, or you can just.
That doesn't help you when you're standing at the scrape where you go freshen it up.
No.
Right?
So I always tell people, just make sure you check. And again, it's been, unfortunately, because the cost of the products to manufacture, certainly in today's environment, things have gone up, but. The new sprayers are more expensive with the wider tube and more material. And we also we just put the sprayer in the bag and we seal it, because from the time it's manufactured and sitting in our warehouse, we don't want the crystallization process with the tube in the liquid. So we actually seal and cap it, for shipping, and the sprayer's in the bag. So it's better for our consumer, but at a cost to the company. But it's worth it, because
the product will perform better when the consumer gets it.
And we want to do right by our consumers. I mean, one of my biggest things that I always said to people is, I'm not a scent guy. I was never a scent guy. I mean, I've done the wing and the prayer. I've bought the $9.99 famous bottle and thrown it all over the tree stand and hope the 180 or 200 incher comes by, and we get to shoot them. And I've done it for years. I mean, it's that impulse buy. I knew nothing about mock scrapes. And again, I mean, when I bought this, I've been hunting here 25 plus years, but I wasn't that big into mock scrapes and rubs and what that means and how the deer communicate. And that's honestly where Troy Pottinger came into it, the due diligence process. And if any of the listeners don't know Troy Pottinger, I'd say go Google him, go listen to his podcast, listen to what he has, because he's used buck fever, the former hog synthetics, for over 30 years, which, it goes way back to the original founder, which was a guy by the name of Kevin Cray, who helped develop with Mitch Rampolla and the Rampolla buck.
Yeah. Yeah, we had a chat. We don't have to go all the way down that rabbit hole, but we had a chat when we were talking about this stuff before we hit record.
Yep.
That you came up on the Deer Hunter podcast when they were talking about the Rampolla buck when Kevin had Troy on, and that was like, I was like, damn, he's talking about Troy. Like, I gotta get him on the horn. But that's somebody like Troy Pottinger is the guy that is, he's pretty much a regular Joe that is getting it done on giant bucks in Idaho, in the mountains.
And national
you see the
forest,
pictures,
public ground. Yeah.
You see the pictures he's getting and the stuff that he talks about. Like, he's one of my, when I see him on a podcast, like, I'm tuning in, because there's something to learn there.
Yeah.
And I've been the same way with scents. I haven't really been knocked off my feet. Nothing's really produced for me scent wise. So I just kind of like stopped using scents. But then I hear somebody like Troy talk so rapidly about how effective they can be, this product, the buck fever product line, it just makes me like, so what is it to it? Like, and I think the synthetic piece of it, I guess I don't want to throw too many questions at you here, but like, so first, what is it about buck fever synthetics? What do you see as the benefits of it, or how are you using it, like here locally? Like, what are because there's a lot of different products you guys have under that line.
There are, yes. And basically the essence of it is when they came to us and said Jim was willing to sell the core formulations for what we have, I had to do my due diligence, and that's where Troy came up. And after the conversation till about 3 o'clock in the morning with Troy, and it's funny, like, and I tell people all the time, and I've gotten this question a bunch, and people say, oh, of course this guy says this because you pay him. He's a paid pro staff, blah, blah. I do not compensate Troy Pottinger. Okay, I've never written a check to the man. He's been given free product, and he does his own stuff with it. And that to me is huge because I don't want to pay somebody, in this industry. And every deal I've done with the people that are on our marketing and media platform, they'll tell you, I've said, I'm not going to give you money to do this. I'm going to give you the product. If you believe in this product, okay, you come back and we'll work something out, but I won't ask you to put your good name, your reputation behind it, because I don't want to do it. So when we look to buy this company, my partners and I, we all said, we're not scent guys. We got to look into this. But I said, listen, if this is truly hog synthetics, like I know this stuff, I used it, I had incredible luck with it, but it just disappeared from Walmart. And that was unfortunately the business events that occurred with, Kevin, when he had developed this formulation with Mitch. It just went by the wayside, and then Jim had it, and there was no internet, so you couldn't get it. It wasn't sold anywhere but locally in some of the Michigan archery and sports shops. Mm-hmm. And so when we did our due diligence on it, we came back and said, okay, let's look at the aspects of what really buck fever is and how does it work, which is a system. It's 100% pure synthetic. So that coupled obviously with the CWD, which I know we could, do multiple podcasts here on things.
Right.
CWD, whether you believe or disbelieve in any of it, doesn't matter because politicians are politically doing what they need to do. Laws are being passed. I mean, if you look at the recent law in New Jersey, which I know New York is looking seriously at and most likely will probably pass it's not only illegal to use real urine in the state of New Jersey, it's also illegal to sell it. You look at Pennsylvania in the CWD zones, you cannot use real urine. It's illegal in Vermont, illegal in Virginia, North Carolina, Alaska, you're getting,
it's coming. States. It was presented this year.
Yep.
What was it in the deer plan or
it
was it?
Yep. Yeah. And but it's still on. It's still there. It's not going away, and especially this.
But they didn't vote it into law, but
correct.
It's in the proposed deer plan.
Yeah, and I believe the DEC official stance on it, like the Georgia DNR, if you read almost every whitetail state, DNR's handbook about rules and regulations, and every single one of them is now stating to hunters for the conservation movement and the future benefit of the deer herds, all hunters should probably seriously consider using synthetics. Yeah. And is a law going to follow it? Most likely, and that's coming for sure. And so as we see that, and now people say to us like all the time, well, that's not right, and I'm not making the laws, I'm not doing anything. But as a business guy, when I went, hey, if we're going to buy this and we, don't want to go underneath, how beneficial is it going to be? Buck fever is 100% synthetic, so it's legal currently in every state and every Canadian province. It's legal in all CWD zones for hunters listening in region that hunt Pennsylvania. If you're in a CWD zone, you can use this. The uniqueness of the product and our number one complaint that we get all the time, if you buy our green bag bottle, which is our pre and post rut, which is a mixture of both doe and buck, mimicking urine, people say all the time it doesn't smell like deer pee, and I'm like, well, right, it's not supposed to, and they're like, well, but it's for mock scrapes, it's for scents, it's for drags. I'm like, yeah, but it's not urine. It's a synthetic blend of chemicals that are designed to mimic the biologic and chemical behaviors that affect whitetails to do what they do with their own natural urine for the reproductive cycle.
And at that time,
and
correct?
It's a specific time of year.
You think about everybody, like you take the 19-year-old Billy, he was taking Tink 69 and dumping it in a scrape on September 1st.
Yeah, I hear
and
it.
It's like, in the moment, you're like, well,
that's going to attract a big buck.
Males like females, so this must work. But it's not. Like they're not chemically ready yet.
Correct.
So they come to this scrape and they smell something that's not in the right place at the right time.
Correct.
That a mature buck's not falling for that.
Correct. Yeah. And that's where, we've built the entire system and to run it. And you can literally, and if you watch any of our social media, and to many of the listeners, if you don't follow us, you can find us at Buck Fever USA on Instagram, and Facebook and TikTok. And we show.
Do you do any dances on TikTok, or what do you?
My daughter does,
Okay.
my wife does, and her friends, but no, I
No,
don't.
I would prefer not to see you dance.
Grady, our intern, definitely, I think, set us up on that. So,
Nice.
using the younger generation's ability, I don't get any of that.
No, me neither.
I have a great support staff, that takes care of a lot of this for us. Buck Fever is a year-round system, and that's important to point out. And, we've scaled back. We do have, off of our base formulation. So our 3 base formulations are our forehead gland, our pre/post rut, and our rutting buck. Those are the original 3 hog synthetic formulations. Off of those formulations, after a few years of testing and work that we were doing, we came out with the Red Moon Rut and the Red Moon Estrus, which are, higher end synthetic chemical blends, more potent, that we sell in 2-ounce bottles. The forehead gland, the pre-post, and the rut we sell in a 4-ounce and an 8-ounce and gallons. When you look at that, and we have a bear, we have an elk, we have a moose to cater to those hunters too, because what we've designed works with certain attributes on all the animals, big game animals that you're hunting. We scaled those products back for the spring season, so we created our Dirt Fusion and our Branch Action, and that's really with the game camera craze and the cell phones and deer inventory and the conservation movement, we realized that, and after talking to Troy Pottinger and other deer biologists, in the industry that we know very well, that have said, the deer communicate all year long.
They're using them, yeah.
Yeah,
if you find a good scrape, good looking
right,
branch,
that
they're
communal scrape. They're going to be there. We don't see them there in January, February, March, April, May, because we're not in the woods, and before game cameras, you couldn't watch them. But if you put your game camera on a scrape, those deer are actively going to visit those sites. They're geographically targeted to where they live, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's their home range. So basically, we created, and I always, people always ask us, what's the difference between Branch Action and forehead gland? Because, they're very similar. And I said, yes, they are, except Branch Action is like 1 cup of coffee, where forehead gland's 10, or an 8-ounce Red Bull versus 24-ounce Red Bull, So when you look at those and you use these scents, you can pattern these deer, and that's what Troy Pottinger is constantly talking about, is all you're doing is patterning these deer in the science of the deer behavior and their biology of how they naturally act, okay? In a buck's life, right? Food, cover, security, and breeding. I mean, that's pretty much it. That's their home range. They're going to set up a geographic home range where they have enough food to sustain themselves, they have enough cover to protect themselves, enough water to drink to live, and enough does to genetically do what they're bred to do, which is breed and offspring.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all they think about, and certainly as September, this time of year, August, right, the coats are starting to change right now. We're getting early September here in another week or so, and the velvet's going to start to peel off and the testosterone levels rise in the deer. When you introduce buck fever to your geographic home range, wherever you're hunting, it can be used on a 5-acre piece, or it can be used on a 500 or 5,000 acre piece. If you build a communal scrape, or you take a known established one that's in existence and you add buck fever to it, you're systematically introducing a new genetic deer or set of deer that your local deer are going to go, who moved into the neighborhood? Who is this? And how do deer communicate with one another? Scent, their nose, okay? Visually, and then physically, obviously, as the fall rolls on with the bucks, dominating and fighting for, the geographic supremacy in their area to breed the does. So the mature bucks that we're all trying to harvest, for the most part, okay, when they come into that scrape and they smell, who's the new kid on the block, and what's in the formulation is, through their sense of smell, it's a 6-pack ab, young, strong, fireman that's, the pinup model that every girl looks at and says, oh my God, yeah, I wish my husband looked like this, right?
Right.
And
I've been trying to be that for like 20 years.
Yes,
it
exactly.
ain't happening. I'm going downhill.
Well, I'm downhill. I'm at the bottom of the hill.
I wasn't going to say
Just ask my wife, she'll tell you constantly. And we laugh, all the time, because, it's nature for the most part, of, yes, men are attracted to women, women are attracted to men, and systematically how it works is, when the bucks begin to smell this, right, and people always tell us, like, hey, I'm starting to notice a lot of does are bedding in my scrape. What's up with that? Well, that doe wants to be bred by the DNA purest buck. It's biology. They want their offspring to be a superior fawn for longevity. right? I mean, it's king of the jungle.
It's nature.
It is. And so ultimately, as a buck visits that scrape and urinates in it and rubs his glands, his forehead gland and orbital gland and all the stuff on the licking branches, there's multiple communication going on. And as testosterone rises in the fall in the bucks, and they frequent these, mostly nocturnal, they're going to realize, like, Billy, the stud buck, was just here, but I've never seen Billy. All I can do is smell Billy and say, all right, Billy was just here. And the next scrape he goes to, and he's like, oh, Billy was here, and the agitation begins to occur, saying, hey, Billy's starting to intrude geographically, and it's getting to be late September, early October. I'm going to have a problem with Billy. When I catch up to him, I'm going to beat his ass. And we'll whoop him, And we've all, hopefully, if you've spent time long enough in the woods, you've seen two bucks battle, for that geographic territory. And so ultimately, buck fever synthetics does that, where that puts the mystery set of deer into the geographic range, and as the testosterone gets to the peak of the rut, the mature bucks can't stand to know that there is a buck. I've smelled you. I know Billy's here. I know he's running around my home range. I just physically haven't been able to catch up to you to engage in that battle and kick you out of here so I can breed the does and you can't. And systematically, that's, where in daylight hours, hopefully, that you're sitting in a tree stand in those mature bucks. Buck fever will put mature bucks on their feet during daylight hours because that's what's designed to do.
They can't help it. They have to. Yeah. So do you see that as being something that, obviously it sounds like the buck fever line, you're kind of like managing that scrape process throughout the entire year.
Yep.
Whereas do you like go back to your 30-year-old self that was using, Tink 69, not to keep giving them, just to use brand X's.
Throw it out there, yeah.
Doe urine.
Yeah.
That just go in and dump that doe urine in a scrape
Yep.
on November 2nd. And then they're like, well, why isn't this working? And now, like, everything you're just saying, it makes perfect sense. Because now that I'm becoming more aware, I'm running trail cameras on licking branches, and I'm seeing, so just over the last 3 weeks, I've seen bucks start to use a licking branch, and it's almost it's a different buck almost every night. And I've seen my two big bucks on those cameras they're gone. They haven't been around. But I'm anticipating that they may be coming back because they may be out doing a little walkabout as well, seeing what's going on. Because these bucks I'm getting on camera right now are not the same ones that I was getting pictures of over the whole summer.
Yeah.
But so basically what I'm seeing in those pictures is the same exact thing as what your scent is doing. It's just your scent is an artificial deer that is going to spike that buck to say, I haven't seen this deer. I've seen this other guy. I've seen this 6-pointer running around that's hitting every scrape in a 5-mile radius. But I haven't seen this buck that's hitting my scrapes right now.
They're gauging their competition for the fall, for the breeding season. And essentially, if you look and like even our social media, a lot of our social media comes locally from, the Finger Lakes region. A lot of people use it. And a lot of our photos on our cameras come locally. And you'll see, there's usually 2 or 3 bucks, when there's a buck working a licking branch and urinating or checking out the scrapes. A lot of our pictures show the bucks and does at the trees, at the scrapes, because that's the drawing power. I mean, we attract fawns, does, bucks at all hours, at all time. And I always tell people, there's so many gimmicks in this industry, and there's so many things that are, realistically have been introduced that obviously people try to make money, on it. But I tell people all the time, if you truly want to know how well this product works, okay, you get the product, you put your game camera, you make your scrape, and then turn your video camera mode or your picture mode on. You show yourself making the scrape, okay, and then you walk away and watch how long it takes. I mean, I have a local guy that hunts very close to my home property who literally last year was like, are you kidding me? He's like, I dumped your rut out when I got out of the stand in front of my game camera. And he's like, by the time I got back to my truck, my cell cam had flashed a photo of a good buck working where I had just dumped that. He's like, I'm not even.
The deer must have watched him do it.
He's like, I'm not even 200 yards away.
Right.
And he's like, and that's what, the attracting power of it. But it's like, I tell people all the time, just dump it out and let it work. Sometimes it works in minutes. Sometimes it works in hours. Sometimes it takes a day or two, because, and it depends on what time of year you do it. And if you use the system, if you truly try to pattern a deer and you slowly introduce it, if you just go out and dump our rut product, October 15th. You know, I've had people do this. The pre-post of the rut. They dump stuff out there, and all of a sudden the first couple game cameras, it says, "Whoa, I see the does look really skittish." Like, "Oh, your product scares deer away. There's something bad in this." Or is it that, hey, it's mid-October, buck's testosterone is rising, does are being nudged around,
Right.
hunters are trying to fling arrows at them, predators are trying
There's a
to
lot
kill
going
them,
on.
and all of a sudden they're getting whiff of something that they're not exactly sure what it is, but they're on high alert, and so it's going to take a little time. I mean, if it's the wing and a prayer like we all did with the 1 ounce bottle of whatever, and you threw it out there and kind of like, oh, what's going on with this? You know, it did or it didn't work. You know, our system has been proven consistently to work, and I think the growing popularity of our product is that testimonial. I knew when I bought this, like, I'm like, I know in my heart this is going to work because, you know, I believed in it. I've seen it work, and I, you know, obviously before we signed on the final check to buy it, we, you know, had tested again to make sure it was working exceptionally well. And that's the thing is, like, the Facebook people, the Instagram people, the people on TikTok, the people saying, I get emails, I get instant message stuff all the time, like, your stuff's unbelievable. Like, I used your estrus, I killed a 160 in a matter of 15 minutes. Like, and it's not a miracle drug. I mean, I've had a lot of people use it and say, hey, I didn't kill a 150.
There's a lot of factors
yeah,
there.
You know, but it's, you know, it's going to help make you a better hunter because it is going to help you pattern the geographic deer in your geographic range, you know, given all the variables that are associated with it. We try to price point it at a price that's fair. We give 4 ounces retail wise right now for an MSRP of $14.99. A lot of stores sell it at $12.99 for the 4 ounce bottle. Our 8 ounce bottle is a $24.99. Most places sell it $22.99, you know, give or take. And then we have our gallons that we sell. You know, we try to give you more ounces. Cool uniqueness of our product is when you use it, it does crystallize in the ground in dry weather. It reactivates with moisture. It does not filter directly down through the soil. It adheres to the soil. Okay, it will stay a much longer period of time. People always ask me, how much should I use? You know, it's a rough question. It's like anything else. I mean, how much more caffeine are you going to get if you drink a 24-ounce Red Bull versus an 8-ounce Red Bull?
Right.
You know, I mean, if you really want to jack it up, you know, use the full 8-ounce bottle, you know, and you're going to get more activity because it's more potent, it's more powerful, it's going to stay longer. You know, how long do you have to refresh it? It's up to you. You know, I mean, given the summer that we've had here in Western New York, you know, we're refreshing our scrapes every week because, you know, there is a lot of rain dilution on it. It's not going to wash it away. I have another neighbor that lives just a couple doors down from me who has a nice place in the southern tier, and I introduced, you know, Todd to this a few years back, and it was a couple years ago. Remember, we had that horrible wet summer too.
Yeah.
And literally, he had just put his game cameras. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he literally, it was great because I had given it to him, and he's like, "Man, I feel so bad. I dumped all that product you gave me out." And he's like, "We've had nothing but a week of rain." He's like, "I put my trail cameras. He's like, I'm gonna go down there and check them." He's like, "Oh God, I know I'm not gonna have anything, right?" He sent me a slew of photos. He's like, "Are you kidding me?" He's like, I would have thought this all would have washed away. He's like, look at the bucks coming to this stuff. He's like, I'm hooked. He's like, hey, give me your internet site. He's like, I'm buying it, you know. So, and that's the reality of it is I want to provide a fair product, you know, as do my partners of we want stuff that work for hunters. We want you to be successful. You know, I mean, yep, it's a business and yep, we're here to make a profit off of it. But yet at the same time, we're trying to give you a very fair value for what you're purchasing on a product that legitimately works and it works year round. And there's a system to it. And the more you do, I mean, if you look at, you know, my wife's social media post, I mean, over the last few years at home, she's killed a couple really nice bucks, and she's killed them in buck fever scrapes. Yeah. She killed a nice crab claw 10 last year.
That was a nice buck.
2 days before the end of the gun season, the trail camera started showing that buck coming up just at the end, roughly around legal light, coming out of a thicket. You know, it was a sanctuary. And she's like, how do I hunt this? I was in Nebraska on a duck hunt with our waterfowl company. And I said, just refreshing that scrape, just be patient. I'm like, he's going to pop out. You know, 2 nights before the end of the season, he popped out at 18 yards working the scrape.
And that's the thing about the, you know, as you're talking about the effectiveness of the scent, you know, like the ethical or the fair chase thought comes in your head, but you're still dealing with a wild animal.
Yeah.
You're using that scent to get things moving and to get some consistency so you can try to get an idea of a pattern and keep that deer around. So when you get to that rut, he is trying to protect his ground because he's worried about this other deer. But you still aren't going to be able to control weather. You can't control wind. You can't control all those other factors, what your neighbor's doing, what the other deer in the area are doing. So there's a lot of things. So it's not like you're throwing a scent at it that's going to, you know, be the, like you said, it's not just the easy button to hit that's going to just put that 10-point buck right in front of you.
Right.
But it's a tool to put in your toolbox. So if you're going to spend, we all people are just spending, I mean, I'm guilty as anyone spending so much money on trail cameras and trying to get inventory, and the hours you spend moving those things, putting new batteries in them, this and that. If you can enrich your camera site, which is a lot of times a scrape or a main travel corridor, but a lot of times those are the same thing, a travel corridor with a scrape where you can get a nice picture. If you can enhance that with a scent to help get those deer more consistent or bring other deer in to check it out, like I can definitely see the value of it.
Yep.
And you like, I'm just sitting here as you're telling me all this stuff that you've done in the last year and a half with this company. It's kind of like mind boggling because it feels like I've known about buck fever for longer than a year and a half, but that's all it's been. I mean, I'd heard about it a couple times, maybe prior or right around that time frame, but my God, you've done a lot with this in just a short period of time, let alone a year that was completely jacked up in 2020.
Yeah.
So my God.
And I can't thank the people around me, you
Right.
know, obviously my wife and my kids and my family and my dearest friends, you know, that, and they know who they are. There's a bunch of them, but you know, I got a small inner circle of, you know, what we call now our COVID family, right? That's who we all spend our time with,
Right.
That have supported me, you know, every inch of the way in the hours. I mean, I literally, and people laugh. I mean, last summer here, you know, in Victor in our warehouse, I had my in-laws, I had my parents, I had my children, you know, literally in here packaging in a crunch to get a major sporting goods store's order out, you know, through. I mean, it's been for sure a
takes everybody to
sacrifice.
do
It
it.
really does, you know, and it's you know, we consider it a family. You know, I have a couple business partners in Buck Fever. They're all wonderful. You know, one that dedicates a tremendous amount of time and energy and effort in supporting me, and supporting the company as a whole, you know, helping my social media people, you know, I mean, Jason and the rest of the crew here, you know, at Rock Ridge Outdoors, that's now part of this, Rock Bordelon, my partner, you know, I mean, there's been so many people that have just been so influential, like, hey, you got something and it works. And I laugh. I've got people in the industry, and, you know, obviously, you know, for anonymity and not using names, but I have people like, hey, we're sponsored by this other scent company. And he's like, and literally, he's like, we dump their stuff out and have always put your stuff in the bottle and used it, you know, because it works.
Yeah.
And it's like, I've been amazed at those stories. I mean, people have come up to me and whispered in my ear, I've used your product for years. It's like, I love it. And I'm like, you can't say that. You're sponsored by so-and-so. Like,
Yeah.
I don't care. Like, your stuff's legit. And I think that's just it, is the true testament. When we first bought the company, after the year of testing that we did and started playing around with the formulas and seeing what we could do to improve and build new formulas, I gave so many free samples out. My business partner's like, listen, you're going to bankrupt us before we get started. And I'm like, I'm not, because the same thing that happened to me is going to happen to these people. You're going to use it, and you're going to go, holy crap, this really works. And I said, then they're going to come back and be consumers. And that's what we're seeing. People, for the first time ever, that bought from us in March and April to get inventory for their game cameras, you know, are now buying again. And they bought a 4-ounce bottle to start with, and they bought an 8-ounce bottle. Now they're buying gallons because they're like, hey,
They want to
me and
do every camera that
right.
they have.
And everybody's got, right, multiple cameras, multiple
Yeah.
scrape sites from multiple farms and leases. And it's like, you know, I got guys that call me and say, hey, you know, my two buddies and I, the best deal is your gallons, so we're going to buy your gallons and we'll split it up amongst us. Yeah, like whatever works for you, you know, it's legitimate, it's there, you know, and it is going to work. And, you know, I have, especially in a state, right, New York State, we can't bait. Okay, so baiting's not legal. You can't use. You're not supposed to use food for your inventory, your whole camera. You know, but you can use buck fever. I mean, it's inventory, and I have a gentleman in the industry. It's very well to do. He owns a couple of the other companies, and he literally a year ago out in Iowa, you know, sat me down and said, "You by far have the best, you know, attractant in this industry." He's like, you know, you have something that is literally going to blow up and be successful. And he's like, and of course, CWD and the politicians are going to continuously help push that button for you as more laws are passed. But he's like, you know, you just need the popularity. You need people to try your stuff and get it out there.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, and once you do, he's like, it's going to be a success. And the greatest part for me is knowing, one, it works and it helps hunters obviously do what we all want to do. Which
Yeah,
is,
you want a product that's actually good. You don't want to just be like the super, you know, successful president and CEO of a company. You want to have a product that you can feel proud that people are out there using it.
And I want people to be able to be proud to be like, hey, I've used that product. It's legit. It works. It's worth every penny I've spent on it, because we're all hardworking people.
Right.
I mean, as a kid, I scraped by. I mean, I did everything I could to buy products. I couldn't buy any of the expensive stuff. I could never afford a cell camera, you know, let alone 2, 3, 5 of them,
Right.
you know, and it's like I could have never got where I'm at today without obviously the hard work that people put into it. And you know, your money is important to you, and the hard work and the effort. And so many of us love the outdoors, and that's our drive and our passion is to get out there and do it. And we all sit in that tree stand. And I'm not a huge buck killer. I mean, my biggest buck to date's like a 165 in Missouri. I mean, I'm not a 185. I'm not a 200-inch club guy. I've missed more bigger bucks than I put on my wall. I'm sorry. I'm guilty of buck fever. I mean, I've shot under. I've shot over. I've made all those mistakes. I'm like, why didn't I take the shot? I mean, I certainly have had opportunity to be in place, in front of some of the bigger ones, and I get rattled, but it's, that's the whole part of the company that I think for our success and the more people that try that stuff and really say, hey, I'll give that a fair chance. And I appreciate that. So many people have said, hey, I'm not a scent guy. I'm not buying that stuff. But after listening to a podcast or talking or a seminar I've given or Troy Pottinger's given, people's like, hey, I'm going to try that stuff. Mm-hmm. And now they're repeat customers, and they're buying every year. And they said, I'll buy this stuff. A couple of years ago at the Great American Sportsman Show in Pennsylvania, right? We went down. We were there, and it was the first time buck fever had been there in years. More older hunters sold more product than we did. Literally, older guys came up to the booth and they're like, wait a minute, is this like buck fever, like hog synthetics buck fever? I'm like, yeah, and there's younger kids walking by and this and that, and they're like, how much do you have? How much can I buy? They're like, I'm like, buy all you want. We got tons of it. They're like, where have you been? They're like, we used this stuff 8-10 years ago. You guys haven't been back. What happened? Is it still the same formula? They create such a frenzy around our booth.
Well, and if an old timer's saying it, you might want to listen.
Yeah,
because he was wearing his jeans and a flannel and shooting bucks over buck fever.
And the younger kids were like, "Are you serious?" And I mean, they literally were sitting there promoting it for us, and it was a great phenomenon. We sat there and cracked up and watched. We're like, "Man, this is great. We can just sit back and relax." And these older guys are gonna sell this stuff for us.
No kidding.
Yeah.
I appreciate you being open, and you've before we hit the record button, you've been open and honest about kind of the whole workings of how it all goes down. But I think you being honest about like somebody like Troy and the fact that he's not on a payroll, he's using the product, he's passionate about it, and he supports it and talks about it because he believes in it. Yeah. I think it's like people that are following the outdoor industry closely, or any industry probably, but we're focused on this, is that you kind of start to sniff it a little bit, that there's like, well, is that person saying that just because they're paid, or are they saying that because they believe in it? And you being as open and honest and candid as you are about, being the owner of the company, that this is how it works. Like, these people really, truly do believe in it. Like, that helps build my confidence in whether it's something to really believe in or not, because that's candid. Like, that's real. And that. Like, you not only have this going on, but you have going on with Rock Ridge. It's like everybody has heard a story about somebody who's paid by this brand, but they're like, I really actually prefer use this one.
Right.
I'm sponsored by this backpack company, but I don't use that one to carry my meat out. I pick up this other one that's the better pack.
Correct. Yeah.
So like, everybody's heard those stories, so it just makes you a little bit leery. But it is cool to kind of hear the back end of that from you. And
it is, and that was one of the things, because I wasn't going to risk my investors' money as well as my own money that I had to put up and my family money. To get into this, if I didn't truly believe that we had a product, that was going to be a failure, and I wasn't, I'm not going to sell you. And I've had people call and say, your pre-post rut doesn't smell like anything. I dumped it out and it's water. And I'm like, it's not, I'm like, and you have to trust in it that yes, there is a smell to it. You as humans don't necessarily smell it, but I'm like, just please dump it on the ground and put your game camera up and, call me back in a week. And it's funny. Like 3.5, 4 years now that we've been into this, I've had maybe 2 phone calls from people that are saying, and one's a good friend of mine from the North Country. He's like, I'm not really seeing much activity on it. And I'm like, really? And he's like, yeah. He's like, I'm really not. And he's like, my deer numbers are all messed up. He's like, I got a surplus of does. And he's like, I don't have a lot of bucks up in the North Country, and they've all been shot. And and I'm like, just keep giving it some time. And he's a super great guy. And, a couple months went by and he goes, okay, I'm getting a little more activity. And then the second year he used it, he goes, man, I'm getting a lot more activity, And I'm like, and there is, some places it's not a miracle worker. I mean, I've had a majority of people, and Troy's in the Pacific Northwest. I mean, if you go Google Troy Pottinger and you look at his wall of fame, that's Idaho. Not Iowa, not Illinois.
I know.
That's not Pike County.
Those deer are ridiculous.
That's Idaho. And people are like, and I had to look it up. I'm like, are they even whitetail? I know there's muleys up there. I know there's elk. I know there's bears. I know there's wolves.
Sort of man-bear pig or something?
Yeah.
What is
I'm
this?
like, and I'm like, there's no way that's, and he refers to them as his mountain bucks, and I'm like, holy crap. I'm like, those are freaking huge.
Yeah.
You know, and then he's sending me the video clips for the years of, you know, the stuff. And the buck he just killed a year ago, and he killed it in a buck fever scrape in 2 feet of snow as the deer is pawing through the snow to urinate in the scrape. And he's like, and the arrow falls literally in the open scrape. He's like, what better testimonial can you get than that? And it was a slob.
Yeah.
You know, and then those deer are being hunted by mountain lions and wolves, grizzlies, you know, and so it's like, you look at that, he's on public ground.
Yeah.
You know, he's not Iowa. I mean, don't get me wrong. And he's like, hey, I've used it in the Midwest. You know, he's like, I've used it in Ohio also. I've used it in Kansas. He's like, he's like, you give me a couple of days in a buck fever scrape in any state. He's like, I'll kill a good buck. You know, no doubt about it. And he's an accomplished, phenomenal hunter, and he knows his stuff extremely well. And I think that's the cool part of it. I mean, it works all over the place. And, you know, getting into buck fever and leading into, obviously, you know, Rock Ridge and all the stuff we have at Rock Ridge, and that's how I met Rock Boat Alone. I mean, we had the company. We were looking to sponsor people. A good friend of mine worked for Rock, and at the time it was Rock had his TV show On the Road Outdoors with Aaron Lewis. And so I called him, and when I was talking to JC, and he was like, hey, listen, he's like, you know, Aaron Lewis knows Troy Pottinger. He wants to go up there and hunt with him. And he's like, if Troy Pottinger says that this is legit, he's like, I'll bring it to Rock and Aaron. We'll see about, you know, taking you on as a sponsor for the show. And, you know, he called me back one of the day. He's like, dude, you're in. He's like, yeah. He's like, Aaron, you know, Troy was like, yeah, absolutely. You guys are crazy not to use this stuff on your show. And that's what originally, you know, how I met Rock. And then a year later at ATA, they came back to me and said, hey, we want to continue the sponsorship, this and that. So I sponsored the show there for a year and a half, 2 years. And then, you know, Rock had said to me, hey, if anything else, you know, ever pops up in the industry, you know, I'm not just a guy with a TV show. He's a diehard hunter. I mean, great story. He's Armed Services veteran, grew up on a dirt floor in Cajun, Louisiana. He's a self-made guy. You know, worked his tail off to get where he's got. And I think a lot of people, you know, when they follow him and say, oh, well, you know, you guys, you know, you're business owners now and you guys make money so you can afford to travel and do all this stuff. We weren't always. No. You know, I mean, and it's a cool story there, you know, the fact that he served his country, you know, and then he's gotten out and he's an entrepreneur and self-made. You know, and now he has a TV show. He co-hosts it, you know, as Craig Morgan has come on board with us as part of this. And that was the cool part is, you know, as we started to put these other brands together, you know, that was an integral part of just how small of a world it is. But people migrate and say, hey, I want to work with that guy because I trust him. I believe in him. I know he's got a good product. And that's what we want to do is put good products out on the market, you know, so that hunters that can afford it can use it and enjoy the time that we have afield, because it's also precious, it's also limited, and certainly, you know, life's awful short, as we all know.
Yeah, it is. And I'm sitting here looking at the clock, and we're going on an hour and a half, and we haven't even started talking about Rock Ridge yet. Yeah. So I'm thinking that's a whole separate conversation to go on from there. And we've gone pretty deep with buck fever, and I'm curious kind of to focus on buck fever to kind of round out the conversation for this episode is, like, what do you recommend is like when you're on your property working with the product, putting it on the ground, putting on your scrapes, like how are you approaching, are you wearing certain clothing? Are you trying to be as scent free as possible? Are you wearing gloves? Like, how do you recommend to use the product as far as you're going to go into the field, whether it's April or it's November? Like, how are you approaching using the product?
I've always learned, you know, for me in my entire hunting application, I've always been a scent freak. You know, it's not as far as using scents, because I never did, but being scent freak. And that thing is, you know, I've always rubber boots. Like my wife always says to me, you know, she's going out and she'll be like, "Why are you putting the boots on?" I'm like, "Why are you putting the gloves on?" I'm like, "'Cause you can't touch this stuff." I mean, a truly mature buck lives in a home geographic range, and we live, I mean, right? It's suburban agriculture. I mean, it's not. You know,
deer smell people.
Yeah, you know, they're not mountain bikes. You know, like Pennsylvania, what Troy's hunting in Idaho, you know, or even the Midwest on the big farms. I mean, we have deer that commonly interact people, dogs. You know, it's a smaller piece of property, you know, where we live and hunt, and so we're cautious of the deer and take every precaution. But I'm scent free. When we did buy buck fever, we also bought a formula for a product called Vanishing Hunter. And it was funny because the guy we bought buck fever from, Jim, he was running with Vanishing Hunter. He's like, this is an odor killer. And I was like, come on. I'm like, these odor killers are all the same. Right. I mean, if you break them down scientifically in a lab, you know, it's you got this, and you add a couple of these into it, and you got it.
Baking soda, water, I don't know.
You got it, and it's like our formulation is a little different. I have had it tested in the University of Rochester in an accredited lab, with a very good friend that's a very large set of credentials behind his medical name. And he's like, this stuff's pretty legit. He's like, this stuff kills odor, like no tomorrow. And so it's cool because I didn't want to buy it if I had him test it and he was like, no way. And I know who he is. I know his credentials and I know his morals and his values. I know he's going to come back and be like, this stuff shit, don't buy it, So we ended up with Vanishing Hunter, which is our odor killer. And it's a phenomenal seller. I get more outfitters and more people call me like, hey, I need Vanishing Hunter. I need this stuff. It can be sprayed on your skin. It's basically organic, and we've had it, in the testing process. So that's a cool part to it, and it's, directly spray. So I spray my hands, anything that I'm touching, even though I'm usually wearing, gloves, I'll spray the outside of the glove also, so that there's no residual smell of anything I'm touching. And obviously I try not to touch anything. Where I'm applying here at home, I'm not as cautious with it because constantly I'm bush hogging. We're constantly riding a UTV.
Your scent's all around the property all the time.
Correct. It's my home range. So we go out and we spray, but typically the application is obviously the forehead gland. We spray on the leaves and the branches. We're using, if somebody's listening to this and says, hey, what do I buy tomorrow to go use? We're at that time of year where you want to use our blue and our green package, which is our forehead gland and then our pre or post rut package. The pre-post green package is what goes on the ground. In the forehead, you can put it on wicks, you can put it on licking branches. You can do it any. Jason that runs our social media here out of the Victor, New York office. Jason is a huge fan of spraying forehead gland on rubs once they start to pop up. We have tremendous deer activity from tree to tree to tree, right to your tree stand on rubs. We've killed some nice deer in the last few years with that method. 2 or 3 years ago, I was in Pike County, Illinois. And a friend invited me out there to a camp, and I brought a bunch of samples, and none of them were interested. And these were a couple guys from Buffalo, one from Grand Island in particular. He wanted nothing to do with it. He's like, listen, and then the one guy from Buffalo said, I'll take it. He dumped it all over his boots, the forehead gland walking in. And he actually showed me his videotape with a cell phone. He got up in the stand about 15 minutes later. Here came like a 125-inch 8-pointer walking his trail. And he goes, I got a little lost in the dark to the stand, so I had to detour. God. He goes, I had to jump over a downed tree. And he actually filmed the buck going under the tree to stay on his path, and literally said he's filming him. He came right to my tree stand. He's like I'm in, and he told the other guy, he goes, Mike, you don't want to use that? Give me that stuff. He goes, I dumped my whole bottle out on the boots. So you can use it in any traditional method. Our core and what Troy Pottinger talks a lot about is really scrapes, because of communal scrapes and how scrapes triangulate deer and the interaction geographically of how they travel. So if you're buying it tomorrow and dumping it out, you want to use the blue forehead gland and then the green on the ground. As the season, gets a little further in, obviously the rut, you can start using the rut mid to late October, depending geographically in the country where you're at in the stage of the rut. And then obviously, at that peak time too, we have the red moon estrus and the red moon rut, which are just a jacked up higher synthetic concentrate of stuff. My partner in buck fever here, who hunts down by Dansville, 2 years ago when we were first testing the red moon estrus, literally walked to his tree stand and, I'll use your words, pulled out the old Tink 69, just throw it all around your tree stand and watch what happens. So he took the, buck fever red moon rut or red moon estrus and threw it all around his tree stand. He climbed up in his tree stand. He was hauling his bow up, and about 160-inch buck came right to the base of the tree stand, and he nailed it. It was about 10 yards, and it didn't go 20 yards. And, he's calling me freaking out, yelling. He's like, this stuff's amazing. And I'm like, nobody's going to believe you. You're all part of the company. I'm like, you're such a liar.
Yeah, we can't use you in any of the advertisements.
But, it literally, it just, and we laugh. The rut side, Craig Morgan first used it a few years ago on camera where, it's live film, right? He's out throwing it all over a cedar tree. And then they go back and set up, and they did a small rattling sequence, and like literally they were talking off camera, and the camera guy's like, he's like, crack, 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 and Craig's like, oh, here comes, the buck came charging in and was raking the cedar tree like crazy.
Jesus.
He shot at 18 yards. So, it's kind of laughing. So, there's, the system. We always tell people, and then obviously, we freshen our stuff up in December, January, February, March. And I get, obviously, not everybody can. People say, well, you can do that because you own the company and you get the product for free. We do send, we keep it active because we keep it communal. We run our cameras. year round. You know, we want to do the inventory of what survived the season, and then we want to keep the pattern. Usually January, February, March, we switch back over to the branch action and dirt fusion products just because they're lower. You know, it's that less heightened, you know, as the bucks are coming down off the rut, so to speak, geographically here in New York. And you know, we run that all the way through. You know, we really start to dose stuff up in turkey season because, right, you're out early. You do your stuff while you're in the woods. I always have my pack of buck fever stuff with me while I'm turkey hunting. I walk by those communal scrapes I know are the stuff we've made, and we refreshen them. And we start to really juice it up and get our cameras in May to really see the velvet growth going. So, you know, that's kind of system. Our website does have a buck fever calendar telling you, you know, the different
what
products.
to use when
when
that's
we're
cool. Yeah.
You know, our good friends down at the Bearded Buck, Jerry Tibbet and his son Austin out of Western Pennsylvania, great guys, you know, are doing a bunch of our social media stuff where they're doing videos showing them using it in Pennsylvania and showing that calendar for buck fever.
Okay.
We're doing a lot of video, as obviously our own, you know, on the road show is doing the same and stuff. So we're trying to put an ad. We're trying to add the podcast to the website. We're a small company. We don't have enough resources to put all this stuff in at once, you know, and I tell people just, you know, please be patient.
Be patient, yeah.
You know, but the podcast we're doing, the social media, the stuff you can find, you know, and ask, you know, most people, ton of people instant message Troy Pottinger or myself. You know, Troy gets back to as many people as he can, you know, and, you know, people really want that testimonial. Like, you know, he says, people text me 20 times a day, does buck fever really work? And he says, I text back, yes. And he's like, okay.
That's
it. That's it.
I just needed that answer.
That's it. Yeah.
That's all. That's cool.
Yeah.
What else? I was going to ask you anything else about buck fever in particular. I feel like we covered it pretty good. I'm very intrigued now, you know, and I know you, and I don't feel like I'm getting sold a bill of goods that, you know, it's something there. So it's about that time. I'm going to be doing a bunch of cameras end of this week. So
yeah,
might have to give it a shot and see. I got to figure out where those 2 10 points went. They disappeared, and I had them both on camera last year, and they both disappeared. So I don't know where they go. I'm trying to figure that out. But
and you know, I always wonder, do they go far or are they actually close by? And I go back to my wife's 10-point from last year. We only saw that buck once.
Really?
During archery season. And he almost got clipped by a neighbor. Thank God for a west wind, you know, and him on the east side of it. And you know, my wife almost killed him that night because, you know, the neighbors pushed him back to us as soon as he got downwind of the neighbor, and he came right back by us, but he ran by too fast for her to shoot him with the bow. And then he disappeared. The entire route, he disappeared. He was nocturnal. We had him a couple more times on camera, you know, and I was like, man, it's going to be a tough one. And then he started to show back up more on daylight and like right after the end of the gun season and the muzzleloader season, the late bow. Or I'm sorry, he ended up coming right before the end of the regular gun season, before muzzleloader late bow. And that's, you know, 2 nights before he started showing up, and it was like, oh my God. And I knew with her refreshing that scrape that he is going to show up there. And it's like, you got to get him now. But I don't think he ever went further than our sanctuary.
Right.
I think he was in that thicket. I just think, you know.
He didn't have to go anywhere.
No.
Yeah.
And they become such nocturnal animals with the pressure, you know, and there was a lot of pressure around, obviously, in where we live and, you know, the hunting that goes around on us. But I always wonder, I don't think they go as far as we sometimes think they go.
I don't think so either. And that, I mean, when you get into hunting the big woods and so like some of these deer that I'm chasing is down towards our camp in Naples, and you know, it's big woods, it's side hills, so I mean, a deer could be summering in this spot and they could be, but I just can't, you know, I got two big 10-pointers. They're big bucks. I cannot believe that both of those deer are relocating miles away from.
Yeah.
Why would they?
Yeah.
There's no reason. They have food there, they have cover, there's water. All the things you just talked about. There's a great doe population, bedding. It just doesn't make a lot of sense that they'd be going that far.
Right.
And I did have a camera stolen last year, which tells me a story. So I put that camera. I found a rub on it's a pine tree. I'm trying to think it's not a cedar. Christ, I want to say it starts with a J. Like not something pine, whatever. We'll just call it a pine tree.
Gotcha.
This thing, I'm not kidding. I mean, it was a huge pine tree. I've never seen a rub like it in New York. And I'm like, holy shit. And this was it had to be like the 12th of November. And I was in that area because I shot a buck with my bow near there. And I was doing a quick power hike, getting a couple spots set up for opening day of gun for my buddies and I. And I found that rub. So I grabbed the camera that I had and I put it on it. And I left it there to soak for the whole rest of November and into December. And we were up there hunting last one of the last days of muzzleloader, and one of the guys I was with was in the area, and he came up to a camera and he, called me. He's like, "Hey, was this your camera that's over here?" I'm like, "Yeah." I go, "Is it a Primos camera?" He's like, "Yep." I go, "What's the matter?" He goes, "Memory card's gone." I'm like, "Really?" He's like, "Yep." He goes, "The camera's off, the memory card's gone." I'm like, okay. So luckily, whoever the guy is didn't steal my camera.
Right, yeah.
But what does that tell you?
Yep.
That tells you that there's something, and both of these 10 points are freaking 20-inch wide at least. They're big bucks. So I have a feeling that I know where they're living, but it's just, why am I not getting any pictures of them anywhere else?
Yep.
And that camera was probably getting pictures of them.
Sure.
Because that was probably his entrance and exit of that bedding area. But it's like just putting all those pieces together. So I'm going to go up there and I'm going to pepper the snot out of that area with cameras.
Yeah.
And just see if I can't figure out what's going on with them.
And I always wonder, I mean, both those nice deer with my wife's killed the last 2 years. We got a bunch of cameras out. Now, I mean, I have cameras out, right? I have the cameras that are out just for trespassers, cell cam cameras. I mean, and that's the thing. It's like, okay, now I got to put cameras out for trespassers. And then I have the actual, other decoy for stealing cameras. And then I have my other lockbox cameras that are actually on the scrapes and the other deer stuff. So,
the other ones are welcome people to steal them so you can get proof of what's going on.
Yeah, exactly.
That's funny.
And that's the sad part. I mean, obviously we've talked about in the beginning of this podcast about every hunter and conservationist and how great hunters are, and the majority of all of them that I've met are. And unfortunately, if you're a person out there that is going to take someone's camera or SD card or steal, you're giving us a bad name.
Yeah. That's one guy out of 100.
Correct. And please don't be that guy.
No.
It's really not worth it. There's plenty of deer and plenty of places to go that, and again, use buck fever and you'll bring one into you. I promise.
There you go.
It's easy enough, but it's true. Like, and I've learned on my home range, my mature bucks pattern us almost more than we pattern them. The last few years of where we hunt, and we've been fortunate because of buck fever. I know she's continuously killed on the same communal scrape, different times of the year. The one before was, during daylight hours, in November versus, end of the regular gun season, in December. But I know for us, like, we don't always get pictures of the biggest one. Now I compare with some of my neighbors and they'll be showing me, the ones they're getting. I'm like, wow. And they just know to stay in that range of the thicket. And exactly where my house is.
Mm-hmm.
And behind my house, I have the food plots in front of the house and behind the house. All summer long, I don't get any bucks out back. Like within, our deck or eye range or anything like that. We don't ever see any mature deer. You got to get further back into the swamp and the nasty area before we actually get pictures of them, and we never see them. I typically, not until mid-October, right around the testosterone spike, that we start seeing cruising bucks.
Right.
And it's always so funny because my wife always says, like, why don't we ever see some of these bucks we're trying to harvest? Why aren't they right here behind the house? Because, we got a clover field.
You have everything you think they want.
They should be right there. They should be sitting out there chowing right now all night long, and they're, they're not. Now they are, I know, in the dark, but I certainly know that they're avoiding the normal paths where the cameras are at to catch them coming in and out of those sanctuary thickets.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just, that's the animal. I mean, that's the drive of why we do what we do and every edge we can get to try to get, one of them patterned and be lucky enough to harvest.
They're
one.
tough to kill.
They are, and people always say to me, "Oh my God, you live in Huntington Falls, Mendon. Can't you shoot deer off your deck?" And I'm like, well, yeah. I'm like, I could shoot a dozen of them off my deck if I wanted to, but none of them are the ones I want to shoot, And I'm like, it's a quest. I mean, there's
and you wouldn't want to do it that way.
No.
You get a hot doe that runs through your yard. You don't want to shoot one off your deck.
Yeah,
Does it sound cool?
Yeah.
Maybe, but you don't want to do that. You bust your ass for, 364 days out of the year to get that one opportunity.
Yes. And I've been fortunate. I've matured into that age, and I'm not going to fault anybody. I've been younger where I've had a mature doe, in our front yard, that ended up across the street. And it was like, it was time my kids were getting off the school bus, and I'm like, I can't shoot him where he's in, but if he gets across the road, I could get across the, all that goes through your head,
right.
Because I'm like, it's such a big buck. And I was much younger, and I'm like,
That's also testosterone
it
peaking.
Is, and because, again, the encounters you have with the mature ones, for us, and I know maybe it's different people in the Midwest, but anyone listening to this regionally, it's tough hunting where we're at. We've grown the size of our deer, and people put the effort in to build, the genetics of the deer that are here and really let them grow with age structure. But it's like, man, I was younger. You saw 130, 140 inch 8 or 10 point. You were in gold. It was money. And I definitely was that person. I was so, excited about it when I started to see those deer. And when you first had a hot doe run through the front yard, and like, holy crap, look at $3 chasing us.
You forget about every other responsibility.
do.
The doors open to the basement, and the kids are walking around. You're like, God, there's a huge buck in the front yard.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the reality of it. That's if it didn't get your heart pumping like that, what the hell's the point?
That's right. We wouldn't do it.
Mm-mm.
So.
Well, you got anything in closing? I do want to get back together, and I know that you're probably going to get super busy here with your hunting season probably really getting kicked off. Do you have any travel plans? Are you heading out of state for anything this year? Or
I am. I do. With the Rock Ridge brands, obviously we have the waterfowl brand called Cupped. That gets busy. Early goose season and stuff gets kicking off. Unfortunately, COVID, though, Rock and I, I was fortunate. Rock was so generous and took me up to Saskatchewan 2 years ago when we launched Cupped. And oh my God, it was awesome, right? And I'm not a huge waterfowl guy. I'm not a waterfowler. I like to shoot waterfowl. And again, if somebody said, well, let's go duck hunting or let's go deer hunting, I'm like, well, okay, we're going deer hunting.
Yeah.
But I love any aspect of the outdoor sports. So, I'm kind of pretty lame. I mean, I'm actually around home. I got a lot of work to do around the house to get ready for my wife and my kids for the season. So I'm a home-based guy. I do have some other travel stuff coming up. We do have, we make a couple trips out to Missouri. I've come to love Missouri, which is wonderful, and I'm hoping to get to Ohio and Illinois, but there's so many variables in it with kids and schedules, and that won't be obviously till later on. So for the most part, no, I'm here. I certainly that. I know there's other brands. Obviously, I'd love to talk to your listeners about.
Well, yeah, so that's good to know that you're not, crazy busy traveling, because I mean I'm not really either. So we'll get together again in the next month or two, and maybe early October or something, and get together some afternoon and shoot the breeze and see what's happening with the other stuff, because I'm very interested in that whole side of it, because I really didn't have any clue of that until we connected just recently, and then I saw that on your Facebook page, and I was over to see Chad Draper to get some stuff from him. He wanted me to say hello. He hooked us up with some stuff we just did a beer release this past weekend.
Yeah, I watched that. I was trying to join you at that. Unfortunately, I got conflicted with family stuff.
We had a great turnout. It was an awesome time. I think there was definitely, after every time you do an event, there's always something that, you sit around and you talk about, like, what could we do better for next year? You're never going to be able to make it, so it's a date that everybody can make it to. But there was a lot of conflicts this last weekend, right. So trying to figure that out. But it was awesome, and we're growing. This whole thing for us is, we're into year 2. This will be our second. Well, this will actually be our third hunting season we're going into doing this, and it's a lot of fun. And we going back to that conservation and good people portion of it, like, that's what we want to be. That's what we want to do, and we're trying to give back. I'm not making money at this. I'm trying to help entertain and educate people. It's fun for me to meet business owners and to meet other hunters alike, but then also to do something like we did this past weekend and raise, all said and done, we're going to raise over $1,000 for 2 different charities. And one of them literally feeds people in the Venison Donation Coalition. Sure. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, that gets us riled up. Like, we worked really, really hard as a group to put that event on. A lot of people did, my family as well as the people that own the brewery, and we bust our ass to do that. And then to have it all come together and have a great event, and people had fun, people walked away with some great prizes, and to help, all the help of the different companies locally that supported us and gave us things to donate. Like, that's what it's all about, like, that makes me feel good. It's not about me. It's not about Purton Your Outdoors. It's about helping other people and getting people engaged.
Right.
And it's making relationships and
it is without
just
a doubt.
life, networking.
It is, and that's a huge side of it, and it's a huge shout out, and thank you guys for doing that, because I know you're not making money at this. I know, what you promote and how well you promote it, and you
we're a net loss organization.
Correct, right? And the lifestyle,
right.
It goes with it, and it, it was crazy, and I know, this is a crazy busy weekend. We had talked about this a little bit before of, I was in San Antonio at a buy group show, and it was the first one since COVID, so, we were doing that, and my very inner circle friend got married on Saturday, just south of us here. And I landed Friday night, and I told you to rush back and Low Cash, that, is a great country music group that, diehard hunters guys. I got the pleasure to meet them for the first time, on Friday night there at the fair. And it was just, supporting people that are the culture and the lifestyle within your listener base here, the people that listen to this, is really important. And I think a lot of people don't realize we're here.
Yeah.
I mean, and
I
that's
had no idea that you were
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't know what I know. Now what I know from today, no idea. And I bet you 99% of people have no clue.
Yeah, and that's funny because guys that find me, you know, and I bump into on different stuff, and I mean, even just from I did an Instagram post on my Instagram account about low cash and meeting those guys and how great it was, you know, and I've had so many people text me like, I had no idea, like, well, you know, which brands do you have, and you know, now people are looking up.
It's amazing how you put some country music
stars
stars, what
into
it'll
it,
do.
you know.
But the whole conversation we sat down here today is, you know, walked in and it's like, you know, must be nice, you know, like here you are, like picture you and your wife standing next to a couple country music stars, and it's like, yeah, but you have no idea what else is going on. You have no idea all the travel you had to do to get there and everything you're doing. Like, there's a lot of great things that come from being a business owner, being somebody that's putting yourself out there, but there's a hell of a lot of work that goes with it. Yeah. And you could easily just be a teacher who was going in the morning and coming home at night and no responsibility. But no, you know, you've kind of built the thing up here.
Life was a lot simpler when it was 7:30 to 3 o'clock and come home and work on all my own stuff. And, you know, there's a ton of headaches, and people always ask me, you know, I guess one last final thing is advice of getting into the industry. Should I get into the industry? Should I not get into the industry? And a lot of my good friends that don't get in the industry, just, you know, take some money and go hunting and enjoy yourself. And I see why now. I mean, it's like every profession, every job. Are there perks? Absolutely. I mean, it's so great. I mean, Craig Morgan, you know, when I'm talking to him and people are like, you talk to Craig Morgan? I'm like, yeah, you know, and we go to concerts and the bus with him, and he played at ATA, you know, 2 years ago for our show that we had at ATA. You know, and everyone looks at that like, oh, that's awesome, or, you know, Low Cash or Aaron Lewis or any of the people that, you know, we get to associate with. And it's fabulous because those guys are great. They're normal human beings.
People.
They're people.
I was just going to say,
they put their
people.
pants on the same way we do. They're
Craig
deer
Martin's
hunters.
a person.
They're turkey hunters. Yeah, they're waterfowlers, you know. And so, you know, I think that aspect of, but the hard work and the effort that go into this, there's no weekends. You know, there's no vacations.
Even vacations, there's work. There's
you're
phone
working
calls.
constantly. You're trying to manage, and my wife is always trying to remind me, please manage your time accordingly, you know, for your family as well as the career that provides for us. And it's a struggle, you know, I mean, and I think anybody that was in, you know, the teaching world versus in the private sector, I mean, I wish everybody could switch for a year and just do each other's jobs. I think politically the world would come way further together if the private and the public sector could actually, you know, do a swap and live the experience of what we live. But, you know,
no doubt.
For being in Western New York and certainly the Rockridge Outdoors, and we talked in the beginning of the podcast that it's, you know, we're a secondary warehouse and a secondary, you know, set of offices. Our primary is Minden, Louisiana, but, you know, we are here, you know, the warehouse is here. We do sell locally to a tremendous amount. We have a local archery shops and sporting goods stores that support us, and we couldn't be here without the support of those people that carry our products in their stores, and then your listeners that are our consumers, that whether you buy consumer direct online from us or you visit a local store and buy locally. And we certainly want to push buy locally because that's a huge part to helping make, you know, our community successful. And as we all know, it's not easy to do business in New York anymore. I mean, it's tough. And supporting that. So, you know, for future conversations that we can get into about the other brands under Rockridge and what we offer. But, you know, we're here. I'm accessible. You know, people are always like, hey, can I text the guy? Can I call the guy? You know, obviously from the podcast, I like to talk. You know, I'm glad.
Really?
Yeah. You know, it's one of those things like we're happy to, you know, and I'm happy to promote the education side of the industry.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate your time today, and I look forward to our next conversation. We'll have to put something on the calendar because I know both of us will be. If it's not on the calendar, it ain't happening. So
correct.
We'll connect here again soon, and we'll get something on the calendar to talk some more.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it. And this next time, hopefully, it'll be cooler weather. We'll be on the deck and enjoy a few other cold beverages while we're doing it.
I would greatly enjoy that, and then I could just spend the night at my parents' house. I wouldn't even have to go
right
anywhere.
There.
Be perfect. So, all right. Thank you, Troy. I appreciate you having me in.
Thanks, Billy, and thanks, everybody.
Thanks, buddy.
Bye.